Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. Hope you're having a great day as we continue to celebrate all the amazing people who work in the trenches to make Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. Listen, I talk a lot on this show about Hurricane Katrina, this defining moment in Mississippi. It's not just a coastal Mississippi story. It's a Mississippi story. And what it reminds us of is how important it is for us to be resilient. I talk about resiliency all the time, that what is in the heart and soul of Mississippians as a result of a long history of having to face natural disasters is a sense that when we get hit hard, our ability to get back on our feet is pretty significant, and we've risen to the occasion time and time again. What it shows about us is that politics kind of go to the wayside, and we worry about our neighbors, and we focus on how can we help our community get where it needs to get in terms of recovery. And the stories that we've all learned, the lessons that we've learned, the inspiration that we've gotten from looking back and thinking about it, it's pretty significant. I was having a conversation recently with Marie Sanderson. Her and her husband Brian have been on the show many times, especially during COVID, because they formed this little nonprofit effort that helps small businesses, and we talked a lot about that. And Marie describes herself as a political entrepreneur. She does all kinds of work. She has different companies and has done great work. Her and her husband live in Ocean Springs, and I think they sort of personify a couple that is doing national work but has chosen to live in a specific community, and the commute, so to speak, to their gigs wherever they might be in the United States is very significant. And they've told the story of what it's like to raise kids in that environment when Brian's off doing his stuff and Marie's off doing her stuff. But they learn a lot. I really enjoy talking to them about what they're learning about what's going on in America these days. Marie and her work comes across some really dynamic people. And one of the things she shared with me was this cool children's book called Henry and the Hurricane. It's a children's book that talks about how to help kids think about this notion of preparing for a storm and what are these terms and what is this experience. And it's done with beautiful, you can see for the Facebook and YouTube audience, the illustration is just terrific. I tested it with my grandkids, incidentally, and they responded really well to the lessons that are in this book. Well, anyway, Marie brought it to my attention, and I said, why don't you send me the book? And they did, actually. They did that, and also a Kids Can Be Hero Helpers is kind of as an activity and coloring book that, kids could use in and around storm preparations, or maybe even when it's not, just as a way of educating them about what it takes before and after a storm for the right community to come together. But it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful little book. But then I learned that the person who wrote it, Brittany Perkins Castillo, is actually the CEO of a company that I came to know the name of after Hurricane Katrina. The name of the company is AshBritt, and they're a national company. They're a rapid response emergency management, logistics, and disaster response contractor. They've been in business since 1992. They've been on over 400 missions, serving 600 clients in the United States and the Caribbean. I mean, it's a really fascinating story. You think about what it takes and what we're learning about resiliency, what it takes to respond after a storm. It's a fascinating story. AshBritt in itself is a fascinating story. Then you think about Brittany in particular, being a woman in the business, a business that's dominated by men, I might add. And it's just a great story. And she's had tremendous influence over lots of conversations as it relates to emergency response. You can look her up and go on YouTube and find plenty about AshBritt and about Brittany. So without any further ado, I've invited my new friend, Brittany Perkins Castillo, the Chief Executive Officer for AshBritt and the author of this wonderful children's book called Henry and the Hurricane, to join me today to talk about a wide variety of issues. But without any further ado, let me welcome Brittany to the Ricky Matthews Show. How you doing, Brittany?
I'm great. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for that introduction.
Yeah, you bet. So where are you sitting right now?
So I'm actually sitting I split my time between South Florida. So I'm in Deerfield Beach, Florida right now, or otherwise in Austin, Texas. And so we're kind of, you're right in the middle of us, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, Darren, when I worked for Knight Ridder, Sun Herald was owned by Knight Ridder. And Knight Ridder, the corporate offices for Knight Ridder were on the 6th floor of the Miami Herald building right there on Biscayne Bay. And so when we come down to corporate meetings, we'll stay at the Marriott, Biscayne Bay Marriott. And then I got involved in a very significant restructuring effort for Knight Ridder and had a condominium or a nice room at the Grand next door to the Marriott, where I lived for almost 2 years. But I was home on weekends. I was willing to go do this traveling, which over a 2-year period was about 650,000 frequent flyer miles. But I was going to be home on weekends with my family. That was really important to me. But I loved South Florida. Spent a lot of time there, and it's just a cool place, isn't it?
It really is. And, there's two common threads. The focus on being home for your family. That's really important for us and our team when practical or not on a response mission. But actually, and while I know we're not going to talk mainly about AshBritt today, AshBritt really got it started right around that same hotel and the Miami Herald building some 33 years ago. Our family, my parents had a small landscaping company. That's when Hurricane Andrew devastated South Florida. And our option and ability to go to work and help our community in the storm cleanup happened right outside that area. So,
well, yeah, the publisher, the publisher of the Miami Herald and several of my friends at the time, the director of operations was a guy named Joe Natoli, who ultimately became the publisher there. But I remember it well, man, the way that those set of communities rallied around Homestead being sort of the ground zero for that storm. So much to learn from that. And, in fact, Haley Barbour called Jeb Bush right after Hurricane Katrina. I mean, maybe it was the day after Hurricane Katrina, and said, I need some advice. And what Jeb Bush talked to him about was going all the way back to the learnings from Andrew, and then in 2004, when all those different hurricanes crisscrossed through the state of Florida, he gave the governor some really great advice. And eventually, in the aftermath of Katrina, the governor introduced me to Jeb Bush. I didn't know him. We didn't meet in person, but he introduced us by way of text. And I was amazed at how available he was to me. I mean, we talked, I wouldn't say regularly, but we would, if I'd had a question, he would respond, and he seemed to be somebody who was very focused on helping our community. But Florida has had its share of disasters, and it has helped sort of all of us on the heels of all that. And the reality is that AshBritt, you may have gotten your start there, but boy, that was a big seed to plant around Andrew, and it's become a hell of a company today. Why don't you kind of give people, we're going to get to Henry and the hurricane in a second, but give people a sense of what AshBritt is all about these days.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that so much. I've had the privilege of leading the company for going on 8 years as the chief executive officer. And we are a family business that also was the national leader in post-disaster debris removal and emergency management and logistics services. So what that looks like is we hold most contracts around the country to support and partner with governments, whether that's cities, counties, states, or with the Department of Defense through the Corps of Engineers, to help communities plan for, be ready for the unfortunate event of a natural disaster and or man-made disaster event, so including environmental projects, oil spills, and other crisis events that might impact the community. And then importantly, we're there if and when needed to help respond and recover. But in the last decade, we've also grown our scope of services. Really, if you look at the country, the unfortunate reality is that its emergencies and crises are nonstop, and the kind of definition is growing as well. So obviously, we all lived through the COVID-19 pandemic, but you're seeing some communities, let me say in the migration and immigration challenges in this country. Operation Allies Welcome with Afghan refugees was an emergency management response. And then you're seeing some communities choose to respond to homelessness as an emergency. Others are even extending it to opioid crises. So it's a really interesting time to be partnering with governments and partnering with communities on being both the mitigation and planning side of disasters and the response and recovery. But I'll end by saying in the last 10 years, we've really built out our logistics side. And so we do great work supporting whether it's sheltering, food services, power generation, and the like around the country.
Yeah, so it's a diversified company. Otherwise, you would just be a company that just focused on disasters, and those tend to be episodic. I mean, you may have a string of them, and then there will be a long delay, and then maybe another string of them, or whatever. What's interesting too is that you think about we've been studying here in coastal Mississippi the new risk rating 2.0 federal flood insurance program, which I think has some serious issues, but when you look into that, you start to understand how many communities across America have been hit by flood events. So there's plenty to be done out there. And as you said, anytime you're involved in rallying around lots of people engaged, your company has a role. Let's do this. Let's go to break, and when we come back on the other side, we'll pick it up from right there, and we'll continue our conversation with Brittany Perkins Castillo from AshBritt. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. We're visiting with Brittany Perkins Castillo, who is the Chief Executive Officer for AshBritt. And shortly we'll be talking about this wonderful children's book she wrote called Henry and the Hurricane. But now we're actually just talking about AshBritt, this incredibly diversified company. And when your dad and your mother started AshBritt back in 1992 on the heels of Hurricane Andrew, I bet in their wildest imagination, they wouldn't have ever been able to think of this becoming this multifaceted local, state, and federal, FEMA, DHS, DOD, think of the computer technology that's been deployed to do what you guys are doing. But I would say your parents or your dad or whoever it was driven to create this incredible company that is now hitting on so many different cylinders. To look back on it, I bet it blows their minds.
It's funny. I actually had breakfast with my father this morning, and we coincidentally were talking about just legacy and company and what it means to him. He's got a significant birthday this year coming up in a few months. And so it's an opportune time and, a normal, appropriate time for reflection as well. And it is incredible. I think the first thing he would say, and then I'd echo, it is certainly hard work, fortunate, luck and as well. But he would certainly say it's the phenomenal team we have. So over half of AshBritt's team has been with the company over 20 years. And we've got employees 1, 2, 3, and 4 at 33 years still with us. And then the other half is I'm really proud, since I've been at the company, we've almost tripled the size of our team. So we've got this really great dynamic going on. So I think it is probably something that couldn't have been imagined where we are today. But I'll joke, we're probably often as low tech as we were when we started, notwithstanding the great technologies in our industry and great technology companies.
Well, what's interesting about what you're saying, though, and this is true of any company, that it's hard to bring a lot of people from the outside and maintain a culture. And in your case, it's logistics and it's response and it's, you think of the institutional knowledge that's embedded in those long-term employees. I mean, you can't create that. I mean, that it's the amalgamation of all those experiences that create this company called AshBritt. And it's probably one of the reasons you're so successful, that you have so many long-term employees still with you, and they've been there to see this evolution, and they see where it is today. And Lord knows that working with the federal government can have its challenges because things are constantly changing and requirements are changing and all of that. And the fact that you guys have stuck through it through all this time, that's a pretty amazing story in and of itself, isn't it?
It really is. And I can't say enough. The people we have are the greatest asset. And, certainly in the last few years post-COVID, you've seen a lot of retirements across the board for sure, but certainly specific to the emergency management industry. And so and then there's this tremendous understaffing in government in a lot of communities, and a lot of communities where you've got first responders dual hatting as emergency managers still. I want to make sure I acknowledge that a lot of our work is done by the great people that work in public works and solid waste and parks and rec in our communities. And so having that institutional knowledge where we can support those governments as they're, again, planning, responding, and recovering has been key.
Yeah, you know what? One of the things I learned after Katrina is that what it takes is such a massive machine on every level to dig yourself out of the mess we were in. And, Haley Barbour used to say that, government can help us get back on our knees, but it's private enterprise that's going to help us get back on our feet. And his point was that government's got a role to sort of bridge the gap for people while we get their kids back in school and while we get them a house to live in and while we get them a job. The government's got a role in that, but at the end, and building infrastructure, helping get the infrastructure fixed so that business can get back opened again. But I think about what it takes to pull that off. And I remember one of the biggest frustrations was that FEMA hired all these people, and so many different answers to the same question that would come because you got all these new people. That's actually an important part of the work that you do, is trying to create some consistency in how to manage a situation. I mean, it can get really tough training people up to what they need to be able to know and learn to be effective. That is a major challenge, isn't it?
It really is. And I think one reason our unique business model has led to success is that we keep a lot of the same people that work with you prior to storm, are there, right before the storm's happening, are staying. And if it takes 3 months, 6 months, or a year to do the cleanup, you've got the consistent leadership and operations and logistics personnel from our team. Oftentimes, and understandably, government does rotate. And so we are kind of the consistent staffing. But I do want to make sure it's clear. I believe, and you and I, Ricky, were talking about this, there is a role for government and the private sector. And the reason we have successful responses to crisis events is that collaboration and close work between government and private sector. And so when those partnerships are strong and can be collaborative on behalf of the community you're serving, is really when you see the most efficient, safe response, both on the physical side, but really importantly on the economic side of a community as well.
No, I agree completely. What Brittany is referring to is the conversation we were having before we started the show. I'll say one of the biggest learnings I got as a publisher, and I was super, super active as a volunteer in the community before Hurricane Katrina, but after Katrina, many of us burned a lot of midnight oil to try to help our community come back. Me with responsibilities for the tourism planning side of the Governor's Commission and the work. One of the most important things we had to do there, incidentally, was manage the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Were casinos going to, for example, rebuild their facilities here? I mean, was there here still? And so we had to do a lot of work to try to give them confidence and manage their fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So all that was going on. One of the big discoveries for me personally was understanding. I don't know that I had a good enough appreciation for the role government played. I tended to be more conservative. Let's put it that way. And after the storm, I'll give you a great example. A friend of mine and his wife showed up at the Sun Herald. Now, the Sun Herald, we had guards at the Sun Herald. We had a fortress. We had a generator capacity. Within a day of the storm, we were doing amazing work there. We had, from our sister newspapers that at the time actually reported to me, and the Georgia newspapers in Columbus and Macon, Bradenton in Florida also reported to me at that time out of Biloxi for Knight Ridder. But we had daily trucks coming from places like Columbus with chainsaws and diapers and food, and you know what I mean. It was every day. We would send them a list. They would go buy it. They would bring it down here. We were printing the newspaper there, and that truck would bring the newspapers here and then bring a list of what we needed back with them. But all that was going on. A friend of mine shows up at the parking lot of the Sun Herald, and this is a bank executive. This is a really significant person in the community. He and his wife, their home was destroyed. Their business was destroyed. Of course, the bank, they were still working to get the bank back up and all this, but he just needed water. He literally just needed water. That's how desperate people were in that moment. And then another friend of mine who was a doctor, he a family doctor, a very successful family doctor. He lost his house. He lost his practice, his physical place where his practice was. And he told me that he ate bologna sandwiches for 3 years after the storm, just trying to come. He was not insured well enough, and he had to fight his way back. Thank God he did. But what I'm saying is that Katrina was an equal opportunity destroyer. Most bad storms are. And so it shuffles the deck on the social economic scale. People who might have been seen as, they had means suddenly didn't have means anymore. And so I'm looking at all these people who had needs, and they were Democrats and Republicans and all kinds of different beliefs. And I looked at the role the federal government played in helping them get back to at least begin to get their lives back. And without the federal government, Brittany, we would have been toast. And Governor Barbour was smart in the way he managed the governor's commission. We developed a book that was literally published that showed what our infrastructure needs are going to be and how we're going to go about the recovery. He used that in Washington to get tens of billions of dollars to help us in our recovery effort. But again, I came to understand that there was a very significant role that government had to play. And you see it. Every market you go to, if you didn't have the government playing the role that they play, communities would just flat not recover. That's the bottom line, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I think it's the adage, right, that all disaster response is local. And I think it's a lot of factors, but it's the trust and the local governments and the local community leaders know their community, right? And so whether that's the state, the county, the city level, these are people that citizens are naturally going to look towards, and those that can show tremendous leadership, decisiveness on behalf of their communities, I think are where you do see successful responses and better long-term recovery efforts.
There's no doubt about that. It is a massive team effort, and thank God there's a lot of good leadership up and down the line, and there's a role that companies like AshBritt play in that disaster response as well. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to finish our conversation about AshBritt and shift gears and talk about this wonderful children's book called Henry and the Hurricane. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. I have Brittany Perkins Castillo, who is the Chief Executive Officer for AshBritt. And they do, as we've been discussing, rapid response, emergency management, logistic, disaster response, contractor. They've done work all over the United States and beyond. But the reality is, it's an important company, and they've learned a lot about what you have to do to respond when there are challenges in any community. And as you pointed out, it goes beyond disasters, frankly. So, Brittany, I wanted to chat just a little bit about, you're a woman in an area mostly dominated by men. First, I should point out, you're a lawyer. You worked as a lawyer for like 10 years, right?
A little under, but yeah, for a bit.
A little under 10 years. You come into this role. Do you feel a burden, or maybe burden's not the right word, but I'll just use it anyway, a burden to represent women, but more importantly, actually, in your role to sort of look back and inspire other women that they can achieve great success in their lives if they just put their minds to it? What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say it's a huge opportunity to continue to support women in the field. And actually, you might not even know, in 2019, I launched a nonprofit called Women in the Field of Emergency Management. It's an organization. And I said it's an opportunity because there are phenomenal women across our industry. Though I will give a shout out to all the men and women on my team that have been incredibly supportive of this organization. And the premise really is to support women across the vast roles in the industry. And so certainly we're in the field. It's more boots on the ground, operations, logistics, but there's a great career opportunity in the federal grant management side, in accounting, like I said, in parks and recreation, safety officers, the list goes on. And the goal of the organization and my work is certainly to support people already in the industry, but I'm incredibly passionate about engaging more people to enter the industry. And so a lot of the work we do with high schoolers and those in college, or two-year certificate programs, is to talk about the opportunities, including the vast ones for people that college or a 4-year degree is not for them. And safety officer is a great example. There's careers where you can be making 60, 70, 80, if not upwards, by on-the-ground trainings, certificates, professional development opportunities. And so, I think the leadership of our industry continues to support all sorts of people coming in. And that's what's important to me, because if our work resembles the people in our community, we're going to be strongest and best prepared to respond to disaster events.
Hey, listen, the community college system in Mississippi is one of the strongest community college systems in the entire United States. And then we start looking at rankings on like nursing programs and other programs. The Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College is one of the top community colleges in Mississippi. So by extension, it's one of the top in the United States. One of the things that makes it strong, though, is this partnership with major employers like Ingalls, for example, one of the largest shipbuilding industries here in the United States. And then you have Chevron, this incredible refinery in Pascagoula, and Stennis Space Center, and all the blue chip industries that are part of that. One of the things that makes Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College so good at what they do is they're really focused in on non-traditional education. So before, it was more like a 2+2 program. They go 2 years there and then 2 years to an education to get their education at a institute of higher learning, a university. And so, but what happened over time with their strategic focus, now over 50% of the students who go through Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College are non-traditional. They're doing all kinds of stuff, from diesel mechanic, very specific kinds of diesel mechanic work. They can come out of school making over $100,000 a year. There are all these other trades that they're involved with. But your point about emergency management is not, for people think of themselves as, I got to go to college. But what we've done in Mississippi, we really opened up the discussion about there are so many other opportunities that may not necessarily mean you have to go get a 4-year university degree. There are other things you can do. And I always think maybe they ought to tap into the network that you're involved in, because that might also be a great marriage as well. Because when you think about emergency response in America, there's always going to be something going on. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's something I tend to write and speak about. We just had a phenomenal, thanks to the National Hurricane Conference. They asked us to support 4 sessions talking about leadership in emergency management, focusing on women in emergency management. We had great people from the public and private sector across the country, over 400 people participating in our panels, from career transitions to early career to, again, leadership talks. But I think that our companies really has successfully partnered with community colleges, and so definitely going to have to extend that to Mississippi. I think that there is just, we actually tend to hire a lot of people without college degrees. And I think it's the hunger. Yeah. It's people that are willing to go out there, want to train, want to learn. And we have a national shortage of truck drivers, heavy equipment operators, mechanics. And it's a real challenge across many industries in our country. It's obviously a conversation lots of us continue to be a part of. And so training up the next generation, talent, again, as I said, and I truly believe in our company values, support a belief in that talent is everywhere, but access to opportunity. And so sometimes people just need to know about the great careers. And, on top of the financial benefits, it's exciting, right? The emergency management industry, disaster response, running huge base camps. It's really interesting, exciting work where, you get to support your community, help respond and recover at sometimes very large levels, on top of being able to be a great opportunity to support yourself and your family.
So you also started an effort called Stronger Than the Storm. So and that's where Henry and the Hurricanes ultimately comes from. But Stronger Than the Storm, what was your intention there?
Yeah. So this really grew out of the work that we do at AshBritt and seeing the impact of disaster events on communities. So you spoke a little bit about some of the business leaders that you met, doctors, bankers in your community, of course, across a whole socioeconomic group of people that were impacted following Hurricane Katrina. And you talk about the strain on adults, on businesses, and I just don't think there's enough conversation still on the strain on children and families in our community. And so particularly watching this as CEO of AshBritt, in 2017, another pivotal year after that 2004-05 season in natural disasters. So you'll recall we had Hurricanes Maria, Harvey, Irma, and then you had what at that time was the most destructive wildfires in Northern California. Our company was called upon by the Corps of Engineers to manage that project, and I ended up living there with our great team on the ground for about 6.5 months. My mom would remember this because I got married. I left to get married, and then we came back. So it was a big year. But I say that part of our project was to do the demolitions. We did over 2,000 demolitions on private homes of individuals. And we would call as part of the program 2 days before to let the person, the homeowner know, you're next, your property is going to be demolished on this day. And I'd go out, and a lot of times families chose to come and watch the demolition. And to me, a surprising number of people chose to bring their kids. I'm talking elementary through high school. And so just a lot of natural conversations with family members. There's one neighborhood, an incredible group of people that lived in Coffey Park in Northern California. It was a lot of teachers. It was a lot of law enforcement. The entire neighborhood was gone, but the school was still there. And so it was all these conversations with families and also the community. Do you bring kids back to the school? Do you keep people evacuated? What's best? And so from that and other projects, I think it's important to note what's best is oftentimes related individually to that family and to that kid and their unique circumstances. But what I came to see is I'm a researcher. You mentioned I practice law. I love researching. So I'd be up till like 3 a.m. What resources exist for kids? What resources exist for educators? I talk to any and everyone. And there's a lot of people that want to talk about this. Like, how do we help kids better? And so from all that work, we discovered that there was an opportunity to continue to build more child-friendly resources, more play-based, books and tools to engage kids on the recovery side after something really tragic's happened to them, but also to have resources on the planning and preparedness side. So that's really where Strong in the Storm came from.
It's a really important effort. And as I mentioned before we started, I rode out the storm at our house next door with my kids. And it had an impact on them. If you were to talk to them today, it was a life-changing event. It was for all of us, but in terms of their ability to process what was going on, something like your book, Henry and the Hurricane, which we'll chat about when we come back on the other side of the break, would have really helped them begin to think about all these terms and all this thing that we were doing. And then during the storm, the experience of waves, crashing into the house and wondering if we were going to make it. And then after the storm, we shipped them off to Alabama, where they lived for a few weeks, just because I was involved in the recovery effort. 9 of 11 homes in my family were completely destroyed. So we had our work cut out for us. But the impact on the kids is something we did not talk enough about. And what you're trying to do is bring a hard focus on that. I think it's so important. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Brittany Perkins Castillo. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I have my new friend, Brittany Perkins Castillo, who is the CEO of AshBritt. We talked a lot about that company at the beginning of the show, but she also wrote a book called Henry and the Hurricane. It's a kid's book, well illustrated by a guy named Nathan Jarvis. What's interesting, we don't have time to get into all this stuff, but it occurs to me that one of the things we did after the Sun Heralds, we wrote stories about every single person who was killed in Hurricane Katrina because we wanted to understand the decision they made. And we found that people fell into certain categories, like, and this is not going to be uncommon to you to hear this. Number one, people with pets. At the time, people with pets, they didn't let, if they were going to go to an evacuation center, they didn't accept pets. Immediately, that was changed after Hurricane Katrina. But people died trying to save their pets. Older people whose family lived away somewhere, so they weren't here to urge them to get out, so they would. And another category that I was surprised about and this was probably a bigger issue in most communities today, homeless people tended to find themselves, and many of them rode out storms and places that were not safe and were killed as a result of it. There were other categories, but those were 3 major categories: older people, people with pets, and then those in the homeless community. I would think that I'm sure we wrote about this, but your work as it relates to children and the impact on children, not just before the storm, but after the storm, and the mental side of how to help them through it. We probably ought to spend a lot more time talking about that, because I've watched it. My kids were very resilient and they worked their way out of it, but it was tough. It was really, really tough. The whole experience was very difficult for them.
I think and I think that's the key, what you said. It's the goal is to build resiliency in kids and build resilient kids. So I started this work before I was a parent. I'm now a mother. I've got an almost 4 and 5-year-old. And you know what they tell you is it goes so fast, and I can attest to that. And so I even see this project now through a different light as a mother. So I think that a lot of adults would say, and I don't know if you agree, I don't know that I'd want to be a kid today. I'm not a social media person. And I think that, look at what our kids go through, metal detectors in schools, like the real reality of school shootings, social media and the harms that we probably don't even fully understand with kids. And so this conversation of kids' mental health and building resilience kids is so much at the forefront of our educators, of parents, of caregivers. And I think a lot of people in the emergency management community are really thoughtful on this as well. And so what we do at Stronger Than the Storm is, yes, we create resources. Our activity book has been a great success. And actually the request from people in CERT programs and communities and schools and asking for that book is what led us to actually build out the organization as a nonprofit and create the Henry Reading Book. But it also led us to say, what else can we do from our perch at AshBritt? As we talked about earlier, we have a unique vantage point to help bring people together and collaborate. And so Stronger Than the Storm serves to provide the resources that are kid-friendly, that are play-based, that are engaging. We donate a lot of them for people that can purchase them. We sell them at cost of printing and shipping on our website. We also sell them on Amazon. We've had great support and totally sold out of the Henry books. So thank you to everyone that purchased it. We donated them actually in Rolling Fork following the horrific events there as a tool for educators in the community. But the other thing we do now is collaborate and connect educators, caregivers, and emergency managers to bring together best practices to connect people with what resources exist and help bring those to bear in communities and for kids that need it. And it's been hugely successful. I'm so thankful for everyone who's joined us in this effort. We've led, for the first time in my understanding in industry history, we've led conversations on kids' resiliency and mental health and resource-based approach at conferences in Texas and Florida, in New Orleans, and we continue to grow again. And I welcome anyone who wants to collaborate. There's great organizations that are committed to kids and helping kids post-disaster, and we're here to help build upon that and support that work.
That's so important. We're like, one of the issues we're focused on here is teen suicide. I have also had many shows focused on human trafficking, and people tend to think of human trafficking as something that happens far away. But as a person who was involved in sexual abuse cases in Texas when you were a lawyer, you know this, that often human trafficking can happen in your neighborhood. It's usually a family member. So you think about the pressures that kids are under, and then you start to look at mental health resources in the community that are actually focused on children's mental health. And what you see is a tremendous shortage. So as schools have needs and communities have needs, there's a gigantic shortage. And anything you can do through your organization, Stronger Than the Storm, to bring awareness in and around a disaster so that maybe media can be engaged and others can be engaged about the things to think about to help with resource guides, et cetera, can only help in the overall goal. But listen, we have less than a minute. So what last closing thought?
Yeah, I'll say two things. I say one is, while the work right now in the books is focused on young kids, we've got a great advisory board with leaders from Boys and Girls Club, the Pace Center for Girls, Best Buddies, making sure we're also talking to teens, preteens, kids of all different physical and mental abilities. So I think that's a really key point. When we're talking about kids, we make sure we're talking about all kids. And the other thing I would say is the great work at AshBritt makes us think through shelters. Are we making sure shelters are kid-friendly spaces? We've got great partners at Save the Children working on that. And so I guess my call to action as we end would be, for anyone in the community that works with kids or emergency preparedness, please reach out. Let us know how we can support you with our resources or collaborating and bringing other partners to bear. We do great psychological first aid training, and any corporate partners that want to join us, come on.
You can go to strongerthanthestorm.com, strongerthanthestorm.com to get more information. Listen, Brittany, it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you.
You as well. Thank you for your leadership in bringing these conversations forward and your commitment to building resilience in kids. We appreciate it.
You bet. This has been Brittany Perkins Castillo. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.